The rain outside hammered against the glass of the skyscraper, a relentless percussion to the silent dismantling within.
Amelia Lauron stood at the apex of her empire, the vast, empty office around her echoing the void that was rapidly forming inside her.
Each flash of lightning illuminated the headlines on her multiple screens, flickering like omens. Lauron's reckoning, tech titan topples, fraud allegations rock market.
Her name, once synonymous with innovation and audacious success, was now a public scar, an accusation. The digital world, which she had so masterfully commanded, had turned into a relentless tribunal, each click a judgment, each refresh a new nail in the coffin of her reputation. Just hours earlier, she had been a force, the youngest self-made billionaire to grace the city's skyline. Her company, Ascension Dynamics, a testament to her singular vision and unyielding will.
Now, the very foundation of that empire was dissolving. Accounts were frozen, investigations launched. Investors, once clamoring for a piece of her genius, now fled like rats from a sinking ship.
The board, a collection of faces that had once beamed with admiration, had delivered their verdict with practiced calm, a forced resignation that felt less like a professional necessity and more like a public execution.
Her phone, a device that had once been the conduit of power, now vibrated incessantly with calls from lawyers and reporters, the digital equivalent of a mob.
People who had once begged for a fleeting moment of her time now actively screened her calls, their silence louder than any accusation. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of utter powerlessness descended upon her, a sensation she had aggressively purged from her life 2 decades prior. The walk from her once commanding office felt endless, each step through the hushed, cavernous halls a descent into an unfamiliar landscape of defeat.
Employees, who had once greeted her with a mixture of reverence and fear, now avoided her gaze, their eyes fixed on the floor, their hurried movements an unspoken plea to be anywhere but near the epicenter of this financial cataclysm.
Their silence was not respectful. It was wary, a self-preserving detachment. Amelia moved through them, a ghost in her own machine, her tailored suit now feeling like a shroud. The polished marble of the lobby floor, usually a mirror reflecting her meticulously curated image, now seemed to mock her, its gleaming surface indifferent to her ruin.
As she neared the exit, the heavy glass doors beckoning her towards the storm outside, her high heel caught a subtle slickness on the marble. A moment of imbalance, a sudden lurch forward, and she braced herself for impact, for the final indignity of falling in front of the witnesses to her downfall. But the fall never came. A hand, firm and unexpected, caught her arm, steadying her. She looked up, startled, into the calm, unblinking eyes of Daniel, the night janitor.
He stood there in his simple, functional uniform, a pair of worn yellow gloves clutched in one hand, his mop bucket resting patiently beside him. He was a man she had passed hundreds of times, a fixture in the periphery of her relentless pursuit, his presence so ingrained in the building's rhythm that she had ceased to truly see him. But tonight, his gaze was different. There was no judgment, no flicker of the gossipy curiosity she had come to expect, only a quiet, almost unsettling understanding.
"Careful," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur against the clamor of her thoughts. "I'm fine," she replied, the words catching in her throat, betraying a tremor she desperately tried to suppress. His eyes, for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, drifted upwards to the massive television screen mounted above them, where her face, framed by the stark, damning word, disgraced, filled the frame.
He looked back at her, his expression unchanged. "Headlines aren't always the truth," he offered, his tone devoid of platitude, simply a statement of observation.
Something in his quiet certainty, in the way he spoke as if addressing a peer rather than a disgraced mogul, made her pause, a small fissure forming in her wall of denial. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered, the raw vulnerability in her voice surprising even herself. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement.
Maybe not about billions, Daniel responded, his gaze steady. But I understand losing everything.
Losing everything, pierced through the cacophony of her financial collapse. It wasn't just money, she realized, but identity, purpose, the very framework of her existence.
He then began to speak, his voice soft but unwavering, of a life that had unraveled with a brutality far removed from the cold mechanics of a stock market crash. 3 years earlier, his wife, the anchor of his world, had been taken from him in a sudden, brutal accident. The medical bills, a relentless tide of paper and numbers, had drowned him slowly, relentlessly. He spoke of the desperate fight, the hopeless calls, the eventual, crushing surrender.
He lost their small apartment, the last physical remnant of their shared life. For a time, his car, a battered sedan, became his sanctuary, his home, his office. He took on the night cleaning jobs, a spectral figure moving through empty buildings, so he could be present for his infant son during the day, the only tangible piece of his broken world that remained. I thought my life was over, he admitted, his gaze drifting momentarily to the rain-streaked window. Every morning, the despair felt like a physical weight.
But my son, he continued, turning back to Amelia, he didn't care about what I lost. He cared that I showed up. Every day. Those simple words, uttered by a man standing beside a mop bucket, struck Amelia with a force far greater than any market crash or board resolution. For years, she had meticulously constructed her identity around numbers, valuation, revenue, stock price, market cap. Her self-worth was a direct reflection of her net worth.
Without ascension dynamics, without the relentless pursuit of growth and profit, who was she? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. She found herself sinking slowly onto a polished bench in the lobby, the cold marble seeping through her expensive fabric, a physical manifestation of her internal chill. They froze my assets, she murmured, the fact still alien on her tongue. My reputation is ruined.
They can freeze your accounts, he said, his voice a balm against her panic. They can't freeze your skills. Amelia looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. The simple uniform, the gentle eyes, the profound wisdom that seemed to emanate from him. You sound like more than a janitor, she observed, a flicker of something new in her own voice. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Daniel's lips.
I studied engineering, he revealed, the words carrying the ghost of a dream. Had big plans. Life changed them. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The quiet understanding passed between them, two people who had both faced the brutal redirect of existence. In that hushed lobby, as the persistent rain tapped a rhythm against the towering glass, something shifted inside Amelia.
It was a subtle internal tremor, a tectonic plate moving deep beneath the surface of her despair. She had allowed herself to believe that her power, her essence, was inextricably tied to her company, her wealth, her public image. Daniel's quiet words had begun to pry that belief apart. She still possessed her knowledge, her formidable intellect, her years of hard-won experience, her unyielding drive.
These were not assets that could be frozen by a court order or tarnished by a headline. And perhaps, just perhaps, in this unexpected moment of vulnerability, she had stumbled upon an ally she never knew she needed. The pieces of her fragmented understanding began to reassemble themselves, but into a different pattern.
The collapse, she began, slowly, deliberately. It doesn't make sense. The timing, the trades, it feels planned.
The suspicion, a low thrumming undercurrent she had been too overwhelmed to articulate, now found its voice.
"Then prove it, Daniel," replied, his gaze unwavering, meeting hers with a quiet challenge. He offered no false comfort, no empty promises, only a direct path forward.
With no team, she countered, the reality of her isolation hitting her afresh. Her loyal army of strategists, analysts, and lawyers had vanished. He met her gaze steadily, his eyes reflecting the steely resolve she recognized in herself. "You still have your will," he said. Silence filled the space between them, thick and pregnant with consequence. It was a silence that demanded an answer, a decision that would define her path forward.
Then, slowly, Amelia extended her hand. "Help me." Daniel hesitated only a second, his own past resurfacing, before his calloused hand clasped hers in a firm, solid grip. In that quiet, powerful moment, the billionaire who had believed she was utterly finished rediscovered a simmering ember of her own fire, a spark of defiance against the ashes of her empire.
And the single father, who had long believed his own ambitions were permanently buried beneath the weight of necessity, felt a nascent hope begin to rise again, a quiet stirring of purpose.
They sat together through the long, rain-soaked night, two disparate souls united by shared loss and an emergent, fragile purpose. The opulent lobby, usually deserted and silent at this hour, became their war room. Amelia, shedding the last vestiges of her corporate armor, began to pour out the details of her company's downfall, the bewildering array of transactions, the suspicious market fluctuations, the sudden, coordinated withdrawal of key investors.
Daniel, a man whose daily routine involved cleaning up after others, listened with an engineer's precise attention to detail, his mind, long constrained by necessity, now flexing its analytical muscles. He saw structural flaws in the narrative she presented, subtle inconsistencies that Amelia, too close to the blast, had overlooked. His questions were incisive, cutting through the emotional fog to the cold, hard data.
He drew connections between seemingly unrelated events, pointing out patterns of behavior that spoke of deliberate, malicious intent. He moved to a large whiteboard, salvaged from a nearby conference room, and began to sketch, not blueprints of buildings, but flowcharts of financial transactions, mapping the labyrinthine paths of capital and data. Amelia watched him, captivated, a growing sense of awe mixing with her lingering disbelief.
He identified a specific series of high-frequency trades, seemingly insignificant in isolation, but forming a crucial sequence that correlated precisely with the downturn.
He noted the sudden, simultaneous shorting of her company's stock by several obscure hedge funds just days before the first public allegations surfaced.
"This isn't organic market reaction," Daniel stated, tapping a finger on a cluster of arrows on the whiteboard. "This is a choreographed attack."
A precise, surgical dismantling designed to look like a spontaneous collapse. Slowly, meticulously, a theory began to form, solidifying from the swirling chaos of her ruin. Someone or some entity had not merely manipulated the market, they had orchestrated a targeted campaign to destroy her company, and by extension, her.
The intricate web of deceit, once invisible to her, was now being painstakingly unraveled by the quiet man with the yellow gloves. Hours bled into one another, fueled by cold coffee from a vending machine and the silent determination that bound them. Amelia, who had spent years at the helm of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, found herself taking notes, absorbing Daniel's insights, seeing her world through a fresh, unjaded lens.
She began to connect the dots he laid out, the grand strategy behind the subtle plays, the quiet whispers that had swelled into a deafening roar. Daniel's sharp analytical mind, honed by years of problem-solving in a different discipline, proved to be an invaluable, unexpected asset. He saw the architecture of the conspiracy, the points of failure, the strategic vulnerabilities. Others, blinded by greed or loyalty, had missed.
As dawn broke,
Painting the eastern sky in hues of soft gray and pale gold, Amelia stood taller than she had all night, a newfound clarity in her eyes.
The initial shock, the suffocating shame, the raw pain of loss had not destroyed her.
Instead, the relentless stripping away of her wealth, her status, her perceived importance had revealed something fundamental, something profoundly resilient.
It had stripped away the layers of ego, the relentless external validation, and uncovered the raw, unyielding core of her strength. She realized then that her identity was not her net worth, her company, or the headlines that screamed her downfall. It was her mind, her tenacity, her capacity to fight, and her ability to find connection in the most unexpected places.
The world outside still buzzed with her disgrace, but inside that quiet lobby, a different story had begun, a narrative of quiet resistance and rekindled purpose. Sometimes, she understood now, it only takes one person, one unexpected voice, to remind you who you really are, to show you that the end of one path is simply the beginning of another. Amelia looked out at the city, no longer a defeated monarch surveying her fallen kingdom, but a strategist observing a new battlefield. The world thought she was finished. They were wrong.
The fight was just beginning. Life has a curious way of revealing our true nature, stripping away the veneers we build and forcing us to confront the core of who we are. It often comes not in grand triumphs, but in the quiet, desolate moments when everything we thought defined us crumbles to dust. What then remains? And more importantly, who remains by your side?
The stories of collapse are rarely just about loss. They are about the rediscovery of an inner resilience, the unexpected connections forged in adversity, and the profound realization that true value often lies far beyond the realm of numbers and public perception.
What seemingly insurmountable challenge might be a veiled opportunity for you to rediscover your own unshakable core?